I first heard of the lost masterpiece in the dimly lit lecture hall of the Institute of Renaissance Studies in Florence. A hushed silence filled the room as Professor Julia Rossi stood at the front, her eyes gleaming with excitement and curiosity. She had a way of speaking that made you feel as though you were not just listening to history, but experiencing it, like you could reach out and touch the past. Most of you are familiar with Leonardo da Vinci's works, the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, the Vitruvian Man. She began, pacing slowly in front of the chalkboard. But what if I told you there was a painting far more extraordinary, one that no one has ever seen, but everyone has heard of? I leaned forward, intrigued. The room seemed to hold its breath, and even the faint scratch of a pen on paper seemed to fade away. Legend has it, she continued, that Leonardo da Vinci created a masterpiece, one so incredible, so groundbreaking, that he decided to keep it hidden, not just from his contemporaries, but from the world itself. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. This painting, if it exists, is said to contain secrets so profound that they could change our understanding of the Renaissance, of Leonardo himself, and of the nature of art. There was a moment of stunned silence. "The Codex da Vinci," someone whispered from the back of the room. I knew that name. It was the title of a book, of course, but in this context, it felt more like a prophecy, a clue left behind in the annals of history. Professor Rossi turned to face the class fully. "We don't even know what the painting looks like. No sketch, no draft, no mention in Leonardo's notebooks. But there are clues, cryptic clues, hidden in his works, in his journals, even in his inventions. For centuries, scholars have speculated about its existence, but no one has found it, not until now." I felt a spark of disbelief mixed with an undeniable sense of excitement. The lost masterpiece of Leonardo da Vinci. A myth? A true legend? Or the greatest secret ever kept? "We have a trail," Professor Rossi said, her voice lowering. "A trail that begins right here in Florence, but leads across Italy. From the quiet hills of Vinci to the magnificent halls of Milan, and perhaps even to hidden chambers deep beneath the city of Rome. What we're about to undertake is not just an academic pursuit, it's a quest, one that may reveal more than we ever thought possible about Leonardo and about the very foundations of art itself." I couldn't help but smile. The idea of embarking on an adventure through history, piecing together Leonardo's hidden puzzle, it was too enticing to resist. It was more than a research project. It was the kind of story that could change everything. "You," she said, looking directly at me, "and your team will be the ones to solve it. You're not just students, you're explorers of the past. The clues are waiting, and it's up to us to uncover them." I sat there, stunned. My mind raced with possibilities. Who had hidden the painting, and why? What did Leonardo want the world to see, if anything at all? And perhaps most importantly, what would we find when we uncovered it? The professor passed around a folder containing the first clue. It was a small, unremarkable piece of parchment, its edges worn and tattered, its ink faded. But even as I touched it, I could feel the weight of history. I opened the folder carefully, revealing the first riddle written in Leonardo's own hand. "Beneath the skies of Milan, the light shall reveal the truth hidden in shadow, but only when the stone meets the water." I read it over and over again. What could it mean? The light, the stone, the water? It felt like a riddle left just for me, no, for us, to decipher. I looked up from the parchment. Professor Rossi's eyes were sharp with anticipation, but there was something else there, too, something like fear. She knew, as did I, that if we were to solve this, it would take more than intellect. It would take perseverance, a willingness to dive into the unknown and, perhaps, danger. But that was the thrill of it, wasn't it? The journey, the mystery, the challenge of unlocking the past. And here we were, standing on the precipice of what could be the greatest discovery in art history. "Get ready," Professor Rossi said, closing the lecture. "Your first destination is Milan, and this," she tapped the folder gently, "is just the beginning." The room exploded with energy as students scrambled to gather their things. My heart raced, my mind buzzing with questions. What would we find in Milan? And how much of Leonardo's secret would we uncover? Would we be the ones to finally reveal the truth? One thing was certain. This was only the start of a journey that would forever change our understanding of Leonardo da Vinci, and perhaps even the course of history itself. Milan felt like a city born of stone and secrets. As I stepped off the train, the cool air of the early morning hit me, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of ancient history mixed with the hum of modern life. The spires of the Duomo rose in the distance, their jagged tips piercing the sky like the fingers of a giant, reaching into the clouds. But beneath the city's surface, I could already feel the weight of the mystery settling in my bones. Professor Rossi had been right. This would not be a simple research project. The journey to uncover Leonardo's lost masterpiece had only just begun, and I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole would go. Our first stop was the Santa Maria delle Grazie, the iconic church where Leonardo's Last Supper graces the wall of the refectory. The grand fresco, one of the most famous in the world, had been completed in 1498. But there was something about this place that felt different today. We stood in front of the refectory, staring at the large doors that led inside. "Here, Leonardo gave us a glimpse of the divine," Professor Rossi said as we filed in. Her voice was low, almost reverent, as if the weight of history itself was pressing in on us. The space was almost eerily quiet, the only sounds being the soft echoes of footsteps and the occasional murmur of fellow visitors. But even with the Last Supper looming above us, it was the riddle from the parchment that occupied my mind. "Beneath the skies of Milan, the light shall reveal the truth hidden in shadow, but only when the stone meets the water." What could it mean? I couldn't help but wonder if the answer was hidden right here in Milan, in this very church. Professor Rossi motioned for us to gather. "We're looking for something connected to Leonardo's philosophy," she explained, her gaze sweeping the room. "Something hidden in plain sight. We need to examine the location carefully, the geometry of the room, the placement of light, even the symbolism in the fresco." We spent the next hour meticulously searching for any clue that could tie into the riddle. It wasn't until we stood in front of the Last Supper that I began to see it, a pattern. The light, the way it cascaded across the figures at the table, the placement of the disciples, the way they were arranged in 3 groups of 3, and at the very center, Jesus himself, bathed in a soft glow, illuminated in a way that seemed to pull your attention toward him, as though everything in the painting pointed directly to his presence. Professor Rossi's voice broke the silence. "This is the key. The light," she said, her eyes tracing the shadows in the fresco. "Leonardo was a master of light and perspective. He used it to create depth, to evoke emotion, and perhaps to reveal a deeper truth. We all stared at the painting, sensing it, something just beneath the surface, a message embedded within the artistry itself. It was like staring into the heart of a puzzle, waiting to be unlocked. "Look here," another researcher, Lucas, said, pointing at the farthest left side of the painting. "Notice how the light seems to shift when you examine it from different angles. It's as though the scene changes depending on where you stand." I stepped closer, feeling the change in the atmosphere around me. The shadows seemed to stretch and pull, and the edges of the figures became more defined. The space itself felt alive with the energy of the past, of Leonardo's genius at work. But then it hit me. The light, of course. "The stone," I murmured half to myself. What if the key isn't just here in the painting? What if it's tied to the structure of the church itself? The professor's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Think about the stone. This church is made of stone, and the light we see in the fresco, perhaps it's connected to the architecture. If we follow the path of the light, we might find something hidden in shadow." We all rushed outside, our steps quickening as the puzzle pieces began to click together in my mind. The sun was just beginning to rise over the city, casting long shadows across the buildings. There was something about the way the light hit the church's stone exterior that felt significant, like we were on the verge of something. We made our way toward the southern entrance of the church, where an ancient stone fountain sat at the base of the steps. The water flowed slowly, its surface rippling with the faintest whisper of movement. As I stood there, staring at the fountain, I remembered the last part of the riddle: only when the stone meets the water. Without thinking, I crouched down and examined the stone surrounding the fountain. There, barely visible beneath centuries of grime and moss, was a faint engraving. It was so delicate, so subtle, that I almost missed it. But I didn't. I brushed away the dirt, revealing a set of coordinates. "Here," I said, showing the others. "These are coordinates. This is where we go next." The riddle had led us here, an unassuming fountain with an engraving hidden beneath layers of time. But now it was clear that the trail was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. We gathered around the coordinates and pulled out our phones, using a mapping app to pinpoint the location. It was not far from Milan, but it was certainly in an area that none of us expected. A quiet, overlooked part of the city, an old building tucked between alleys, far from the tourist crowds. It felt like a place Leonardo would have chosen, a spot hidden from view, far from prying eyes. But what was waiting for us there? And how much closer were we to uncovering the truth behind Leonardo's lost masterpiece? One thing was certain: the journey had only just begun, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking in the footsteps of history itself. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon as our small group made its way through the winding alleyways of Milan. The city had transformed in the fading light, the sharp lines of modern architecture blurring with the ancient stone structures of the past. It was as if the city had become a living puzzle, a blend of old and new, history and progress, all woven together. The coordinates had led us to a quiet, unassuming building tucked between two taller structures, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it. The door was wooden, old and worn, its surface scarred by time. A faint inscription above the entrance read, "Casa di Luce," House of Light. It was the kind of place that felt as though it held a secret, an ancient secret, just beneath its cracked surface. Professor Rossi led the way, her eyes scanning the surroundings. She was as determined as ever, her every movement deliberate, measured. But even she couldn't hide the glint of anticipation in her eyes. We were close, so close now, to something that had eluded scholars, historians, and treasure hunters for centuries. The lost masterpiece of Leonardo da Vinci. Luca, the young researcher, pushed open the door. The hinges creaked loudly, echoing through the quiet space. Inside, the room was dimly lit by the dying light of the day, filtering in through the high windows, casting long, ghostly shadows across the floor. The space was filled with dust, ancient furniture covered in cloth, and shelves lined with forgotten books and artifacts. It was like stepping back in time, into the forgotten corners of history. "This place," I whispered, stepping cautiously into the room, "it feels wrong, like we shouldn't be here." Professor Rossi glanced around, her expression unreadable. "Sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries are hidden in the places that feel the least remarkable," she said. "But we must be careful. Leonardo was a master of symbols, of hidden meanings. This room, this house, may hold the next clue." I could feel it now, an almost tangible presence in the air, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Everything seemed to have been left untouched, frozen in time. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something in the shadows was waiting for us to uncover it. Luca moved to one of the walls, carefully pulling back a cloth from an old dusty shelf. His hand froze mid-air as his eyes landed on what was behind the cloth. A large, ornate mirror. It was covered in intricate carvings, and though the frame was beautiful, it seemed almost too ornate for a place like this. The mirror's glass, however, was tarnished, its surface cracked and cloudy. "Professor, look at this!" Luca called out, his voice trembling slightly. We all gathered around. Professor Rossi inspected the mirror carefully, running her fingers over the carvings. They were strange symbols, nothing like anything I'd ever seen. Greek letters, Latin inscriptions, and something that looked like a series of geometric shapes. Some of the carvings were barely legible, as though they had been scratched into the frame with great care. "The mirror," Rossi said, her voice soft with awe. "It's more than just a mirror. This is a map, a key." I stepped closer, staring at the intricate design. It was then that I noticed something unsettling. The symbols were not only carved on the frame, but were also faintly etched into the mirror itself, just beneath the tarnished glass. The pattern seemed to shift when I moved, like the reflection was alive, bending and twisting just out of reach. "This is it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The riddle spoke of light and shadow. This mirror must have something to do with that. It's not just a piece of decoration." Professor Rossi nodded slowly. Leonardo was known for his obsession with light and reflection. He studied mirrors, lenses, and optical effects. This mirror, it's not meant to be used in the traditional way. It's part of the puzzle. I reached for the mirror, but before I could touch it, Luca's voice stopped me. "Wait," he said, his eyes wide with realization. "Look here." He pointed to the bottom corner of the mirror. There, almost hidden in plain sight, was another engraving, one I had missed entirely. It was a small phrase written in Latin, and it sent a chill down my spine as I read it aloud. "Lux in tenebris veritatem revelabit." The light in the darkness shall reveal the truth. A cold silence fell over the group. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in, the weight of the riddle becoming unbearably heavy. This was no coincidence. This was the key. The riddle was right, I murmured, feeling my heart race. The light. It's not just about the fresco or the fountain. This is what we've been searching for. The mirror. Its light. It must reveal something hidden. Professor Rossi's eyes glinted with determination. Yes, but we're still missing something. We have the riddle, the symbols, the mirror. But how do we activate it? What is the truth it's hiding? For the next hour, we searched the room, examining every inch of the mirror and its surroundings. But there was nothing. The room remained still, unyielding in its silence. I began to wonder if we had misinterpreted the riddle, if the mirror was just a symbol itself, a clue leading to another place. Then, as the last traces of sunlight filtered through the high windows, something extraordinary happened. The light hit the mirror in just the right way, casting a beam across the room. It was faint at first, but then the beam grew brighter, sharper, cutting through the darkness, illuminating the far corner of the room. I walked toward the light, feeling an undeniable pull, and then, hidden in the shadows, I saw it, a small door, barely visible, almost swallowed by the walls. We exchanged looks. Professor Rossi smiled, her eyes glimmering with the satisfaction of knowing we had uncovered yet another piece of the puzzle. "It's time," she said quietly. "We move forward. Let's see what lies behind that door." The door creaked open as we stepped inside, the sound echoing like the footfall of history itself. What would we find within? Only one thing was certain: the lost masterpiece of Leonardo da Vinci was closer than ever before, and its secrets, carefully hidden for centuries, were finally ready to be uncovered. The small door creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow passageway that seemed to lead deep into the bowels of the building. The air was thick with dust, heavy with the smell of age and time. Our footsteps echoed through the hallway, the sound amplified by the stillness around us. There was no turning back now. We had followed the clues, an ancient mirror, a cryptic riddle, and now this hidden path. Professor Rossi led the way, her expression unreadable but determined. "This is it," she murmured. "We're almost there, Leonardo's final secret." The passageway was cold, its stone walls rough and unpolished. It curved slightly, leading us deeper into the heart of the building. As we moved further, the faintest light seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, casting eerie shadows that danced across the floor. It was as if the very structure of the place was alive, reacting to our presence. We reached the end of the passage, and there, in the center of the small, dimly lit chamber, stood a pedestal. On it rested a large, intricately carved box. The carvings were unmistakably Leonardo's work. Symbols, geometric shapes, and swirling patterns all converging in a central design that seemed to pulse with life. I felt a chill run through me. This was no ordinary box. This was the culmination of everything we had uncovered, the final piece of the puzzle. This must be it," I whispered, unable to tear my eyes away from the box. "The masterpiece? But why hide it in such a way?" Professor Rossi stepped forward, her fingers tracing the carved patterns on the box. She turned to us, her voice a mixture of awe and curiosity. "Leonardo was always fascinated by puzzles, by the idea of truth being hidden, only to be revealed through the right key. This box, it's more than just a container. It's the culmination of his understanding of light, geometry, and the nature of the world itself. She hesitated for a moment before carefully lifting the box. There was a soft click, almost imperceptible, and the lid slowly opened, revealing what lay inside. What we saw was not a painting, as we had expected, but something far more extraordinary, an object unlike anything we had ever seen. It was a small, delicate sculpture, fashioned from a translucent material that seemed to glow from within. It was a figure, not quite human, not quite abstract, a swirling mass of lines and curves frozen in a moment of perfect motion. This, Professor Rossi breathed, is Leonardo's true masterpiece, a symbol of his understanding of the human form, of nature, and of the divine. He didn't